Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Selling Greenville, your favorite real estate podcast here in lovely Greenville, South Carolina. Beautiful time of year down here. I'm trying to get outside as much as possible. If you're listening from outside of South Carolina, I feel bad for you. We have perfect weather right now. We have really nice springs around here, a very underrated aspect of South Carolina. We get a very nice spring. It's been in the high 60s, low 70s. My ideal temperature, I'm loving it, trying to get outside as much as possible. But right now, I am indoors for you guys, recording a podcast for you guys. It also helps me a little bit. But I want you guys to show your appreciation, if you can, by hitting that subscribe button, by hitting that rate and review button. If you haven't already done that, I would really appreciate it. That gets this podcast out to more and more people. And as always, a reminder as well, I am Stan McCune, realtor here in Greenville, South Carolina, and all of my contact information is in the show notes. If you need to reach me for any reason, but especially if you have real estate needs, I'm your guy. Let me know. Today, we're going to be talking about a development that I recently became aware of, which is a push by both the South Carolina Realtors Association, which we call SCAR or SCR, because SCAR is not a very nice name. It reminds me of the Lion King. The SCR, and they kind of teamed up with the South Carolina Chamber Foundation and the Lincoln Institute of Land Policy. They all put their heads together to take a look at and to research the way property taxes work in the state of South Carolina. And you know what? I've been hearing over and over again from people outside of the state of South Carolina that it's a great state to invest in, but the biggest downside of investing in South Carolina is that our property taxes are disproportionately high for the cost of real estate. Now, that's good in some ways. That means our real estate costs are low, but it's bad from the standpoint that our property taxes are higher than you would expect them to be given the cost of real estate down here. And there is a reason for that. And the reason for that is we have three levels of property taxes, the way I think about this, on the residential side. And on the commercial side, it gets a little bit more complex. I'm not a commercial broker. I do dabble a little bit in the small commercial space, but I'm not an expert there, so I'm not going to speak too much to that. But I can speak to the residential side because obviously that's the side that I work in. On the residential side of things, there is the standard owner occupancy tax rate that we have, and we call that the 4% rate. Okay, so the 4% rate. There's no way for you to just calculate that off the top of your head. When you hear 4%, that's basically meaningless because we have all sorts of other things that go into the property taxes that impact how much you pay. That it's not just like, okay, take 4% of this number and then you can figure out what your property taxes are going to be. No, it's a whole lot more confusing than that. And I'm just going to leave it at that. This is just an overview here. For people that are 65 years of age or older, on top of getting their property tax at the 4% rate, which is the lower rate, they also have a homestead exemption. Now, this is weird because my understanding is in other states, they refer to the homestead exemption as people who are owner occupants. In South Carolina, owner occupants get the 4% rate, and then retirees, I think is the spirit of why they start this at the age of 65, retirees get now the homestead exemption, which then reduces their tax bill even more. So now they have a very minimal tax liability compared to everyone else. Those are the people that are paying the least amount of property taxes of anyone. And then you've got those that are owning commercial real estate and those that are owning rental properties as landlords, second houses, second homes. For those properties, for the second homes, it goes up to 6%, which my understanding is that's also the standard commercial rate. So landlords are getting taxed like commercial retail businesses are, commercial spaces. And so these rental properties, so you think, okay, 4% to 6%, okay. So that's a roughly 50% increase, right? If my property taxes would normally be $2,000 as an owner occupant, as a landlord on that same property, it would be about $3,000, right? That would be a 50% increase. No, that's not how it works. If your owner occupancy property tax rate price that you're paying every year is $2,000, on average, that's going to go up from the 4% to the 6% rate, actually from between 2.5 times to 3.5 times. You're talking about now your property tax bill going from $2,000 a year to about $6,000 a year, roughly speaking, and it varies from one location to the next. And the reason is, and what this report really focused on really heavily, this report that was produced by the South Carolina Realtors Association, the South Carolina Chamber Foundation, which is focused on economic growth in the area, and the Lincoln Institute of Land Policy, their report really looked at this and found that South Carolina is really, really unique, because what's happening here is they use the property taxes in a very heavy way to fund our schools, our public schools in the area. So what they're doing, though, is they are making the owner occupants that are paying the 4% rate. So they're already paying a lower rate. Again, we're not going to get into how that relates to the total price bill. But in addition to getting a lower rate, they're also getting discounted that they don't have to pay the fee towards public schools. They're getting like an education discount, so to speak, on their property taxes. And then it's the landlords that have to foot that bill. That is the bill that gets passed on to the landlords. In addition to them already having to pay a higher rate, they also have to fund the public schools, which is a major part of what the property taxes are going to. Over half of your property taxes, by and large, are, my understanding, is going to fund public education. Well, this inherently doesn't make a whole lot of sense, because it's not the landlords that are benefiting from the public schools, is it? I guess in some ways they could. There are some investors that their strategy is to buy and hold properties that are in great public school districts. I live in Riverside School District, one of the most desirable school districts for just, middle class families, if not the most desirable for middle class families in the upstate. And so some investors do benefit from it kind of indirectly from the public schools. It makes the rental properties more desirable for certain people looking where their school districts are important. It makes perhaps their rental properties appreciate a little bit more in value because of those schools. But at the end of the day, it's the owner occupants are the ones that are actually benefiting from the schools. The owner occupants are actually the ones that are sending their kids to these public schools. And so there is an inherent inequity there. This doesn't make sense. Why are the landlords fitting the bill for the owner occupants? Additionally, this report, and I mentioned that South Carolina was an outlier. South Carolina is the only state, it feels like a country sometimes. It's the only state in South Carolina that does it this way, that makes landlords pay for the schools rather than the owner occupants. So it's a major, major outlier. And the result of that, we've talked about this in the past, is that bill, that's not just a bill that's absorbed by the landlords, right? That's a bill that gets passed on to renters. That's a primary reason why rent down here is so high. It's preposterously high compared to buying a home. We talked about this in the past. It makes very little sense to rent. If you have the money to buy, you need to buy, because you're getting that property tax bill passed on to you. It's 3 times what it would be if you were just an owner occupant. Plus, there's got to be something left over for the landlord at the end of the day. The landlord is not, owning rental properties as a charity. So you're paying extra. If you're renting, you're paying extra property taxes. You're paying a landlord. The landlord might not also be efficient in terms of how he or she manages different things and the way their expenses work and all of that. Who knows? The point is you're paying a lot of money if you're renting, and that is directly related to the property taxes. And this is something I have harped on this over and over on this podcast, so I'm not going to get into it again, but it needs to be reformed. And thankfully, we finally have some people bringing this to the limelight. And my understanding is this report has already been looked at by our governor, by McMaster, and he is very favorable to some of the ideas in the report, which we'll get to here in a second. It's going to be tricky, okay? There's not a simple solution to this. Again, we'll get to that in a second. The other things that this report found is that we excessively tax manufacturing businesses. For some reason, the manufacturing assessment rate is 10.5% versus the commercial property rate of 6%. Which is absurd. Why is the manufacturing rate so much higher? Manufacturers, by and large, don't make a whole lot of money, and manufacturing has always been a major part of the upstate's economy. It is really the driving force of Spartanburg. Spartanburg is a major manufacturing hub in the U.S., and Greenville has plenty of manufacturers as well. They're having to pay more for their commercial property than they should. For some reason, they're getting an extra tax bill just because they're manufacturers. That doesn't make sense. And then, of course, we've got the issue of commercial property as well. Is at 6%. It's at a higher rate than residential property. In this report, they concluded that that's fine. It's fine to keep commercial property at the higher rate, that businesses need to be able to foot the bill a little bit more. That was a fight that this report was not going to even get into. They didn't even get into that. This is primarily about residential real estate and about getting that manufacturing rate down. So what the report recommended was several things. It recommended we got to lower that manufacturing rate to match the commercial rate of 6%. Everyone needs to be paying, if it's commercial real estate, if it's not residential property, they just need to be paying 6%. Rather than having, okay, this person pays this person pays this person pays this. Have it be fair. Have it be equitable. Make them all at the 6% rate. Otherwise, all that manufacturing at some point is just going to get outsourced. We're going to lose business. We're going to have people and companies that want to move down here and want to move their business down here or want to keep their business open down here. They're not going to be able to afford it because they're paying nearly double the property taxes of other commercial properties. Another recommendation of this report was to reduce, and this is the one that I'm most excited about because this would impact me the most personally, is to reduce residential non-owner occupied homes from 6%, the commercial rate, to match owner occupied residences at 4%. So it's recommending, hey, landlords shouldn't be footing the bill on public schools, on public education. This should be something that, fine, they can help to contribute towards it, but it needs to be shared equally among everyone. But the problem is that now you've just lost a bunch of money, right? We've just lowered the property taxes substantially. And so the report recognizes this is not going to be an easy thing to do. Obviously, in order to do that, we'd have to reform the schools, the budgets, their operation costs, their maintenance exemption, all these different things. It's more than just a simple, okay, we just fix these things on property taxes and that's it. No, we're talking about a holistic change to the tax code in South Carolina. And that's the part that I alluded to earlier. That's not going to be easy. Not going to be easy. It's not going to happen overnight. But it's a positive that we have people looking at this. Now, one thing that they add in here that I haven't digged into a whole lot, but I think I know why they did this. They also included that the 15% assessment cap. Okay, so this is a rule that real estate, as the counties reassess properties in the area. Okay, so every so often they will look at properties, and I believe they're probably looking at them annually and increasing the fair market value of these properties, and then that increases the tax bill. Well, currently there is a cap of 15%. A property cannot increase in value 15% in 1 year, is my understanding, unless there is what's called an ATI, which is, if I remember correctly, an assessable transfer of interest. The long story short, even though I may have gotten one of those words wrong or partially wrong, the long story short of that is when you sell a home, that 15% cap no longer applies to the buyer. So if a buyer buys a house, let's say there's a house in the west side of Greenville, that the last time it was sold, it sold for $40,000. You know what? There are houses that are out there that is the case for. Someone has owned it for 40, 45 years. They bought it for $40,000 back in the day, and now they're sitting on this property that, is in need of repair usually. But it's like 8 minutes away from downtown Greenville. It's in an area that is really on the rise. And what happens is eventually that person most likely gets older, decides to sell that property to someone else who has the money that they can rehab it. So he or she, they sell it for, let's say $90,000 to someone. So they end up, despite it's in disrepair, they end up still making a decent bit of money versus what they purchased it for. But then that investor that buys it, they then rehab it, and now they sell it for $350,000 because they made it really nice. They made it to match, the rest of the street, whatever the case may be. The fair market value of that house has been hovering in the 40s and 50s probably for a really long time because it doesn't go up a whole lot. When the last sale was 40, 45 years ago and it was for $40,000. But once it sells for $350,000, now the county can look at that and the county can raise that price pretty much as high as they want. There's not a whole lot of checks and balances there. Usually I see that they raise it to just below what that sales price was. But it's going to be raised. And I always recommend to my clients, there is a great calculator. If you Google Greenville County Property Tax Calculator, I believe those are the exact words. If you Google that, the county has an actual, a great little tool where you can put in the tax map number for the property, whether it's a tax at 4%, 6%, whether it has a homestead exemption, which again, only for people 65 and older. And then you can put in what you want the fair market value to be. If you don't put anything in there, if you just hit calculate, it'll tell you what the most recent tax bill was. But you can play around with, okay, well, what if the assessable value, the fair market value goes up to $300,000? What's the tax bill going to be now? I always recommend to people to use that tool and go ahead and assume that your fair market value is going to be your purchase price. That's really the safest way to do it, to ensure that you don't end up with a massive tax liability that you weren't expecting. Now, Governor McMaster commented on this study and on some of the ideas about it, and he commented very favorably, and he has said that he wants to reform the tax code in South Carolina. Our property tax, there's a whole lot more to this, but our property taxes are really convoluted. There are multiple peoples that shape it. I've talked about this before, but my property that I have out in Poe Mill, I get all sorts of line items on that. I mean, this, Parker redevelopment fee. It's like $600 or $700. Like what is that? Like, I don't get that on my other tax bills. All these crazy expenses for waste disposal. that is like outrageously high compared to what it should be. Like all sorts of different things that you can tell that there's a lot of cooks in the kitchen with this property tax bill. People getting their little pet projects in there, and that's a problem. That's a big problem. But I think the biggest problem is going to be figuring out, okay, so we already have a problem with our public education around here. We already recognize that public education in South Carolina is not the best. It's one of the biggest complaints about the area, along with roads. People want our teachers to be paid more. They want more money invested in our schools. And so there is a real fine line here of like, okay, we recognize that the tax bill, the tax code when it comes to property taxes is not equitable. It's not fair. But at the same time, what happens if we take away from schools? What happens if we if we're not giving them as much money as possible? And I didn't finish my thought before, but I'll tie it in here. The report recommended repealing that 15% cap on being able to assess your fair market value during a year when the property didn't sell. So I think that that's part of their solutions. They're saying, hey, we've got a lot of homeowners that are living in properties that haven't really had much of a tax increase for a while because they've lived there forever, and they need to start paying more towards into the system. We need to remove that 15% cap, and that will help to alleviate some of these issues that we have and make the system more fair. But that's not going to be enough. That's not going to be enough. They're going to have to completely restructure the tax code in order to do this. And the South Carolina governor and people in his office indicated that this has been something that the governor has wanted to get to, whether he's just saying that or whether he really means it. He's been wanting to get to it for a while, but the General Assembly has really been slowed down by COVID. And that's a shame. I feel like that's a little bit of a cop-out, perhaps. But I do know that, obviously, governments have had to be careful with COVID. We need to, at the end of the day, have this at least looked at. And so it's positive. The governor is open to it, is interested in it. But there's a lot of work that will have to happen behind closed doors for this to get implemented. I don't see this happening anytime soon, but I think it's a very positive development. This would, for renters, this would be a great development. For landlords, this would be a fabulous development. I mean, if landlords saw their property taxes go down, to a third of what they were before, that would be really incredible. That would allow a lot of landlords that are currently, they have renters in properties that are in disrepair. Hopefully, in theory, it would give those landlords more flexibility to be able to do more repairs. I bought some rental properties recently, and we're having to do tons of repairs to them because the previous landlord just didn't do anything. Just never, ever did anything. He wouldn't raise rents because he had, kind of a handshake agreement with his tenants. Hey, you'll get these bottom of the barrel rents if I don't have to do any maintenance on the house. But guess what? I inherited it. Well, I didn't inherit it. I bought the properties. And I don't agree with that. I don't agree with that way of doing it. I think people need to live in livable housing. And obviously, their rent needs to justify that. But I think that if we are able to get a more equitable system with property taxes, that will help raise the game a lot in terms of renting. And maybe that allows some landlords, possibly they're like, you know what? I'm not going to increase rents for the next couple of years because I'm making more money now, so I don't need to worry about that. Or maybe they have a tenant that's like, I'm going to leave if you don't address this problem that hasn't been addressed in a while, and the landlord's like, you know what? I've got money now. I can address it. I'd rather keep you in here. So let's go ahead and address this. So there is a lot of positives, a lot of things that could come out of the local government, of the state government, taking this advice and actually moving forward with it. but it's going to take an entire tax code rewrite. I don't know. I don't know that I'm optimistic that that's going to happen, but I'm at least optimistic that they're having a discussion about it, that this problem, which a lot of us that are investing in real estate see as a major problem, as a major issue that is impacting local real estate. It's in their crosshairs. They see it. They're aware of it. They want to do something about it. And now it's just a matter of making it work, getting all the people to the table to rework the tax code in order to ensure that property taxes are fair and are not skewed against renters and skewed against landlords and skewed against manufacturing businesses. That's all for today. If you have any questions, let me know. My contact information is in the show notes. Subscribe if you haven't already subscribed to the show. Please rate and review the show. Love you guys. Hope you have a good rest of the week and stay safe out there.